For this video, I want to talk about what I think about inflation, and I feel my opinions on inflation are a lot different than what others think about it. Um, Basically, people think that inflation is pretty rampant in today's economy. You have the prices of houses going up, of stocks, and various other assets. It's quite clear from the stock market having an absolute crazy bull run, despite the Iran war, that there's definitely something wrong with our economy, or not that it's wrong, but there's way too much excess cash on the sideline where investors are waiting to jump in. So and then along with the stock market, obviously we have the housing market, which has just has increased in a lot of places over the past 5, 10 years with no end in sight. We have houses like single family homes that are going for like that have basically doubled, tripled in price the past 10 years. And it's getting ridiculous for a lot of people. It's like the idea that a single family, like a wife and a husband, could pay for their mortgage together without the help of their parents for a down payment or anything like that, that premise is essentially gone, right? There's a lot of things already talking about that situation in today's economy. But to me, right, to the basic or the fundamental definition of inflation, those things are not inflation. Um, Let me explain. So, not even from an academic perspective or anything like that, just from common sense, mani mano discussing. If you think about it, at least for, let's say, houses, even if the price of houses is increasing, that technically is not a real problem. And I know, like, people are gonna think that's crazy, but the thing is that the housing market can be solved very easily with two things. And because of these two things, it is essentially an artificial it's an artificial inflation. It's not real. And that's why the Fed and the Department of Labor, I think, they calculate the statistics on inflation. That's why they don't count housing um, into their inflation metrics, because uh, it is inflationary, or it is an investment vehicle, and that's not necessarily indicative of the real inflation sort of metrics. But anyways, the housing crisis can be solved easy by two things. Number one is remote work. I mean, that essentially solves housing for the most part. Like, if you can work from anywhere, you are no longer tied to a certain city or a certain place to buy a house. You don't have to think about your commute. You can live anywhere. You could live somewhere cheap, live somewhere nice, go to Florida, Arizona, freaking I don't freaking know, Texas, like wherever's cheap. North Carolina. I mean, all those are like semi-expensive areas, but you know what I'm saying. Once you have the freedom to be anywhere, you could go to freaking Detroit if you wanted a cheap house. At that point, it is your choice where you want to live, as opposed to you being forced to be in an expensive area where you're forced to pay a very high mortgage just in order to make a living. And once you have the freedom to choose where you live, then inflation is no longer a real issue. If you want to move to New York City, Chicago, San Francisco, wherever, these really high cost of living places, if you want to do that, that's on you. Like there's a reason why they're expensive, because there's so much demand, and for them it's very hard to build in such a small place. It's just it's just a simple like physics problem. You know, you can only build so high, you can only build so much, and there's permits and stuff like that. But basically, the problem is boring at that point. It's not really significant if you are choosing where you want to live, and then the place you want to live is too popular. You cannot complain about wanting to be with your friends and having to pay a lot when you can just live somewhere else and make friends somewhere else. I mean, that's just how life works. No one's gonna cry a river if you really want to live in Brooklyn or Upper West Side. Like go use your daddy's money. Like, be my guest at that point. So that basically solves the housing crisis. Then number two is obviously just more inventory, and we've seen that a lot in, I think, Austin. Austin, they've been building a lot of houses, and other places like Orlando, like Jacksonville or something like that. There's housing surveys everywhere, and in some places the price has actually gone down, whereas other places the price has gone up. And so, you know, uh, the discussion around inventory and building permits and all that stuff. I mean, it's already been said. It's very obvious. It's very straightforward. You know, the more supply demand, it's uh it's already been very well set out. So I don't feel that housing is actually a real problem. It's it's just to me, it's the nature of how the housing problem is very artificial, in my opinion. And so it's not worth discussing, and it's not even worth factoring into what is real inflation, right? So we're almost 7 minutes in. So what actually is real inflation? Real inflation is the price of a minimum wage job. That is real inflation. When a company must raise the wage they give to a minimum wage person in order to entice them to work for their company. That, academically, for some people, is the most basic, accurate measure of inflation. Because when it comes to gas, food, utilities, etc., all those things are determined by natural resources, livestock. A lot of these things that it feels the supply is pretty finite, or it's, how do I say that? It's not like a manufactured, it's not a sociological problem that we see with labor, because there's only so many, like, I don't know, there's only so much oil in the world, they're pumping it out of the earth. There's only so much chickens. I mean, they're trying to grow more, but there's global politics at play and supply chain stuff and all that. Same thing with semiconductors. There's like nothing you can do, right? The supply chain is already so complex, and we're dealing with raw resources at that point. And so, like, even if you wanted to change it, you cannot change it. That it's already quite commoditized, and it's quite difficult to build or to change the situation when it comes to these commoditized markets. But labor in itself is not commoditized. It is a very personalized market in which both the consumer, so both the employed and the employee are sort of constantly fighting each other in terms of trying to establish what a proper minimum wage job is. And I think that issue, that sort of competition, is actually quite interesting, because from there we get to see the real impact of inflation. Essentially, how much money would it take for someone to get off their ass? I don't want to say it in a derogatory one, but basically not stay at home and live with their parents and go get a job, right? Because this is essentially the main leverage, the main dilemma when it comes to labor, the cost of labor. And that hasn't been talked about enough. People don't really have that view of inflation, right? And dang, it's already getting long, but I'll talk about this in another video.